Energy Transition, Episode 8, The Conflict Between Stated Policies and Actual Needs, with Irina Slav, energy journalist, David Blackman, contributor to Forbes, and the editor for Shale magazine. Good morning, good afternoon, Irina and David.
Good morning, good afternoon.
Published policies on one hand and the real needs on the other hand. This is what it looks like the energy sector these days, inconsistent. What are the main conflicts between policies and needs in the energy sector, Irina and David, please?
Irina, you take it away.
Thank you. Well, I think the most glaring inconsistency is between the stated policies of the European Union and United States, mostly that they want to move beyond fossil fuels, but we are seeing that we are still very much dependent on fossil fuels, and this shift that politicians are pursuing is not happening as quickly as they would probably like to.
I think that's absolutely right. Yeah, I mean, what we actually need in the Western world and really all over the world, what societies need to flourish is abundant supplies of energy that are affordable. And what has been happening since really over the last 2 years, since governments globally, particularly in the West, have started pushing this energy transition with deficit spending, most of it, in concert with one another through the UN and these global conferences that happen every year, is that the cost of not just fossil fuel energy, but the cost of all forms of energy has begun to skyrocket. And the reasons for this are very simple. The policies themselves are designed to make fossil fuels more expensive, and that's been happening as government policies, as well as the investor community, have begun to discriminate against funding projects to produce enough fossil fuels to supply these energy needs. But the other unintended consequence, I guess it's an unintended consequence, I hope it is that all other forms of energy have begun to rise, and largely because electric vehicles and wind and solar power have all these massive minerals needs, requirements for their batteries and their solar panels and their wind turbines. They consume an amazing amount of energy-related minerals like lithium and cobalt and silver and nickel and other minerals. Antimony, I wrote a 2,000-word article about why antimony, this mineral no one's ever heard of, is going to be incredibly integral to the success of this energy transition, and no one talks about it. We have no antimony mines, not a single one in the United States. And it's a mining process just like it is for all these other minerals. And in Western Europe, in the Western democracies of Europe, very little antimony production anywhere in those countries. It's all coming from other parts of the world, and it's all processed in China, and the supply chains all run through China. And so, we just have an energy transition here that is raising the cost of energy for everyone in all of our societies. And when energy costs rise, all of your food and your clothes and all consumer goods have to be transported to market. And 98% of them are being transported, or 99+% of them are being transported using gasoline and diesel. And so the costs of all those products are rising as well. And so it's a real train wreck right now in the energy world. And we need cooler heads to start prevailing at these global conferences, or our society is going to be in an economic recession very soon.
They are beginning to see the reality because they, by they I mean politicians. For example, the United Kingdom, they wanted to ban exploration in the North Sea for oil and gas. There were discussions on this topic. Now they are planning, they say they are planning a new lease sale in the North Sea, because suddenly the UK needs more oil and gas than it has.
Suddenly.
I think it's a question of putting the cart before the horse, basically, because of course we want cleaner air, less pollution and all that, and lower emissions, but it doesn't happen as easily or as quickly as governments seem to want it to happen, but they have been ignoring the data, they have been ignoring the actual state of affairs in energy demand and consumption. And I think affordability is a really crucial issue here, because we have been hearing for years how the cost of wind and solar power generation is falling. But what these advocates for wind and solar have been neglecting to mention, willingly or not, I'm not sure it's deliberate, but that it's the fact that wind and solar power hinge on low energy input costs.
Right.
For example, Chinese solar panels rule the world because they're the cheapest. They are the cheapest because they're being produced using coal-powered stations. And now that coal has become more expensive amid all the energy crunch in Europe and in Asia, then the cost of polysilicon is rising, and so is the cost of solar panels. Same with steel, same with copper for wind turbines, and all along the supply chain. Things are really, really more complex than governments expected them to be, which is why we're in this situation right now.
And at the same time, some countries are trying to secure more oil from previously rejected countries'
Right.
sources.
Yes, yes.
So this is a very tricky point, David and Irina.
Yeah, I think they should have planned for it before they started imposing sanctions on Russia. I mean, this is something you need to plan for before you start acting. First, you need to plan for the consequences and not rush into asking everybody for more oil after the fact, especially if you have not so good relationships with them any longer. I mean, the Middle Eastern producers and the UAE and Saudi Arabia. I mean, both the US and the UK right now are trying to get more oil from the Saudis and the Emiratis, and they're not getting it because they didn't think that they might refuse. And the balance of powers in the Middle East has been changing in the past few years. And again, nobody in the West seemed to notice this. And now we're all paying for this, which is unacceptable to me as a regular energy user, as a regular person who pays bills. This is really unacceptable. Now the Bulgarian government plans to not renew the long-term contract for natural gas with Gazprom. Okay, you think you're taking the moral high ground, but did you think about all the people who already have trouble? And there are hundreds of thousands of people in Bulgaria who already find it hard to pay their bills. And they say we'll get gas from Azerbaijan and we'll get LNG, but LNG is more expensive, and we could never get as much gas from Azerbaijan as we're getting from Russia. But they're not thinking about this. They are thinking about virtue signaling, and this again is unacceptable.
Yes, I have several points about that. this morning, the Financial Times has an article about Germany celebrating because it has signed a natural gas supply agreement with Qatar. With Qatar. Well, gas coming in from Qatar is going to cost 10 times as much as natural gas coming over through a pipeline from Russia or from Norway.
10 times, David.
Yeah, at least 10 times in current market prices. And there, who's going to pay the price of that? Utility customers, consumers of electricity are going to pay the price for that. And as a percentage of income, that's going to hit the poorest in that society the hardest, which all energy costs always do, because we all pay the same price for it. And if you have less income, it's a higher percentage of your income. That's just simple, that's just simple common sense that seems to escape every high official in all of these governments. They just don't seem to have that ability. Another article that Armando posted on LinkedIn this morning, talks about how European countries, since the invasion of Ukraine, have actually imported more natural gas from Russia than they were importing before. So what does that mean? Well, that means the other European nations are essentially funding Putin's war on Ukraine by purchasing their energy, because 70% of Russia's economy relies on income from sales of oil and natural gas.
I would disagree here that there's a lot of export revenue for the Russian budget coming from oil and gas. Yes, but yes. it's not the majority of GDP. And this is another thing, by the way. Good you mention it. This is another thing that Europe and the US don't seem to understand, that Russia is not a petrostate as such. Russia produces a lot of other things, metals, for example. Yes. It has a really big agricultural sector, and it's got a really big consumer services sector. This is something that the EU and the US, again, slept through. And just because you say Russia is almost entirely reliant on oil and gas revenues doesn't mean it is. Again, they have not done their homework, and their actions are being inadequate. As you pointed out, correct.
And to your point too about U.S. government and Western governments now going to Saudi Arabia and other countries for more oil production. In the U.S., we're also going to Venezuela, where just 3 years ago, our government imposed sanctions on the Maduro regime for human rights violations and complete destruction of that formerly prosperous society. And now here we are, we have this conflict happening in Europe, and our government suddenly is going to Venezuela and say, hey, we'll lift those sanctions. We didn't really mean it. Just produce more oil and send it to our country.
Impressive.
Yeah, and it's again just another example of how these countries' stated policies conflict completely with their actions. And of course, I've talked about it many times. How the Biden government has sought more oil production from pretty much every other country on earth, except for our own industry. And finally, we had our energy secretary speaking at CERAWeek 2 weeks ago, finally acknowledging we need also more oil production from our own industry here in the United States. So at least we've had that little bit of progress on that front.
Yeah, this talking up in Europe on gas, as you said, it's not just bringing in more money into Russia's state coffers. It's just reinforcing this dependency. Maybe they think that, okay, we'll stock up on Russian gas now and then cut it off. Again, they're not thinking very clearly.
Right.
They're not thinking long term. They're reacting after something has happened, which should not be the way politicians do things.
And the lack of long-term thinking. I know you all saw the IEA's 10-point plan last week for reducing oil usage.
I covered it. It was amusing.
Yes, you wrote a really good piece about it. You know, half of those 10 items are things that have already been tried and failed. And the other half are already being implemented in the wake of COVID, you know, like working more from home and ride sharing and all these things companies are doing to reduce travel costs and things like that. But my favorite one of all of them was the thought that you should use more high-speed rail instead of driving your car.
And night trains.
And night trains. I mean, the best example of that's the ultimate Green New Deal energy unicorn. In California, the state government has been now working on building one high-speed rail line that would move people between Los Angeles and California for 26 years. It's been 26 years since they created their high-speed rail authority. It's been 14 years since it took them 12 years just to pass the authorizing legislation for this single high-speed rail line. And that was in 2008. And in the 14 years since, the estimated cost for that single one line was about 450 miles, I think, is the total length of the line, has gone from 29 billion originally to over 100 billion now. And all they have completed is a 29-mile segment between Bakersfield and Fresno. That's all they have to show for 26 years of massive investment and activity related to one high-speed rail line. So the thought that we're going to somehow all just leave our cars in the garage and go jump on a high-speed train is the most ludicrous thing in the world. But this is the UN's energy agency putting this in a paper as a solution and a way to use less oil. And it's the theater of the absurd on a global scale, and it's really inexcusable.
And the United States is totally based on cars. So it's almost impossible. It takes more than 100 years to try to move everything to trail.
Absolutely, absolutely. The same with cycling. There are countries in Europe, the Netherlands, Denmark, Sweden, where there is a very long culture of cycling. People cycle rather than drive, but they have been doing this for generations. Yeah. You can't just replicate the same thing in Bulgaria, for example.
It's a tradition.
Or the US. It's a tradition, it's part of the culture. And it's not going to change. I mean, already most people are biking in for example, Denmark. You won't get the rest of them off their cars just to cycle. Yeah.
But at the same time, bike means sometimes, let's see, it's not possible to everywhere every time. So you need cars, you need to move.
This too, loads. Yeah.
And it's also more feasible in a country like the Netherlands, in Denmark and these other compact countries.
Exactly. They're smaller.
Where people only move, a mile or several blocks to go to work, than it is in huge countries that the population is very spread out. It's just not a feasible solution. And I don't know. These things like this make me angry when I see them because, again, as Irina pointed out, it's virtue signaling over anything real. It's not real. It's not a real solution. It's just people at the IEA wanting to send a virtue signal that they're for this transition, and these are the things that they suggest we all do to do our own virtue signaling. And people have real lives to live.
Yeah, more efficient truck driving was another example. Completely, it's insane. It's ridiculous.
Yes,
you can't. Truck drivers, professional truck drivers, already know how to drive as efficiently as possible. I mean, this is their profession. You can teach them to drive even more efficiently.
Right. Yes, exactly.
The lease sales that the US and UK are promoting to restart the results will take several years, 5, 8 years to return oil and gas to the production. So that's not feasible to have, let's see, a short time solution for the crisis.
It's not a short time solution, even though the head of their oil and gas authority, which by the way is changing its name to North Sea Transition Authority, because this is so very important.
Another virtue signal.
Yeah, all these empty gestures. So the head of that agency said that some of the plots that will be offered, that will be tendered, are ready to go. Well, it still won't happen by the summer or even by this winter. And then they will have to contend with the huge opposition, because in the UK, there's a very, very strong environmentalist lobby. I mean, just think about Extinction Rebellion. They have been making trouble for everyone else with their lions and sticking themselves to roads. Now, without lease sales, imagine what will happen now.
And they have.
Oh, yes. And again, on the California story, the high-speed rail story, the opposition lobby, the environmentalist community, has played a huge role in delaying that project and increasing its costs through the Endangered Species Act, the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, all these surface disturbance considerations a project like that has to take into consideration. And so it's the same people, the same groups that are virtue signaling over here about the energy transition are the ones that are increasing the costs of it all and the time it takes to do these projects. But in the North Sea and these offshore lease sales, the timelines are really extended as opposed to onshore production. I mean, onshore feasibly, you can take a lease and drill a well and have production going within a year or two from a typical lease that's not a government lease. But in these Gulf of Mexico or North Sea leases, even though somebody says it's ready to go, what does that even mean? You have, it's a 7 to 10 year timeline and billions of dollars in investments before first production. And, it's just not an immediate solution of any kind. And we need to, everyone needs to really stop pretending that it is.
Seismic, drilling, construction of platforms, FPSOs, installing subsea and wells. So it takes at least 5 years.
Pipelines, the infrastructure is just enormous.
Deep sea, 5 years.
I think they're just trying to appease people because of all these rising energy bills. It's really bad in the UK, I hear. So maybe they're just trying to cushion the blow a bit by talking about we will have more oil and gas from local sources, even if it's not going to happen anytime soon to make a difference. Again, they're acting after the fact.
Yes.
Thank you so much for this nice conversation. Challenging time, huh? We have a
very challenging.
Very, yeah. We'll be stocking up on wood for next winter. No, really, because the Gazprom contract expires this December, and I don't expect electricity prices to go down. So it's good we still have our coal plants. There's that. But we'll be stocking up on firewood, definitely.
Okay. Have a good day, David and Irina. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Always a pleasure. Thank you very much.
See you next week.
Yes, absolutely.
Bye-bye.
Bye.